One of the signature traits of Martin Short for a long time has been the perpetual and somewhat frenetic energy that he exudes. It's the hallmark of an Emmy-winning actor who's known for trading barbs with Steve Martin, and for some of the most ruthlessly comedic talk show performances in recent memory. But beneath the rubber-faced antics of characters such as Jiminy Glick is a poignant story of survival. There is a story behind that rubber face. What is being said here is that this is a tribute to a spirit born in the crucible of an incomprehensible calamity. To comprehend the person insisting the party must go on, we must understand a life that has been nearly always a series of goodbyes. These goodbyes have been to a brother, a mother, a father, a wife, and most recently, a child. This journey shows a man whose public face is not a mask, but a colorful tribute to the people he has loved and lost in his life. In the course of this journey, not only does a comic get exposed, but also a character of extraordinary perseverance. The latest wave of melancholy began with a blow to the entertainment business, but for Martin Short, it was the death of a vital witness to his creative soul that hurt the most. Martin Short was already in show business when this tragedy happened. Catherine O'Hara's portrayal as Moira Rose earned her an Emmy and made her a cultural legend. And when she passed away on January 30th, 2026, the world grieved her passing. Martin and Catherine were more than co-stars. They were a separate, hilarious organism, with a shorthand that skipped the brain and went right to the funny bone. Martin and Catherine were a perfect partnership. In the early 1980s, in SCTV's most experimental and gritty era, Martin and Catherine were more than just co-stars. Anyone who was around at the time would recall that Martin and Catherine were an item. It was a harsh blow to learn that she had departed away as a result of colon cancer, but it looked as though fate was not yet finished with its merciless procedures. But in 30 days, another change came on Earth. The news, which broke on February 23, 2026, was so surprising that even the most jaded media vultures could not contain their excitement. It came from a quiet mansion in the Hollywood Hills. There was also a residence in the Hollywood Hills from which the report was issued. Martin's eldest daughter, Catherine Hartley Short, died young, at the age of only 42. She was the youngest of many children. This latest tragedy was a shining example of all that irony. A brilliant demonstration of the jagged and cruel kind of irony that Martin's comedy often sought to portray. Catherine was a therapist, a clinical social worker who had spent her whole professional career piecing together the broken psyches of other people. She was a clinical social work specialist. She chose to succumb to a darkness that she had crafted for herself on that Tuesday morning, even though she was the one that others summoned when the light went out. She did this even though she was the one who generated the darkness. Stories of a self-inflicted gunshot wound countered the lady known for bringing light and joy to everyone she treated. The woman was known for her ability to provide light and joy to people she treated. The Short family is devastated by this loss and asks for privacy at this time. Martin Short released a statement no father should ever have to make. He did what good men do in a crisis. He didn't make it about his career. He didn't lean into the drama for a very special episode of a talk show. He didn't make it about himself. It wasn't about his career that he made it about. He held his two remaining boys, Oliver and Henry, close to his chest as he canceled his shows, stepped out of the burning glare of the spotlight, and stepped away from the spotlight. When the audience considered the guy who had played the role of Clifford with such manic and infantile zeal, they wondered, how is he still standing? Look at the anchor he lost in August of 2010, and you will better understand the man who was guardian to his family in the year 2026. The wife of a comedian simply wasn't enough to describe Nancy Dolman. She was the life of the Short family. Only she could match Martin's rubber band exuberance with her own grounded, sharp-witted elegance. She was the only individual who came close. They met in 1972 on the set of the movie Godspell. They were just two kids living in Toronto, trying to find out where they fit into this world. The world was still young then, and they were both living in Toronto. Martin the adorer, Nancy the star of the show. Martin's famous assertion about his own personality was that he would have been divorced 5 times if he had not found Nancy. Martin has been ruthlessly honest about his own personality. They married in 1980, the start of a 36-year journey, which Martin describes as a triumph, not a struggle. He wasn't into the Hollywood game of pretending. He wanted someone that was real. He also discovered a woman called Nancy Dolman, who felt the event fit the bill of the party that would never end. But in 2010, the melody was replaced by the clinical reality of ovarian cancer, which may be defined as both tragic and devastating. This was the moment when the public got its first look of the good man who had been hiding behind the Jiminy Glick facade. As he saw the love of his life walk away, Martin didn't get bitter or angry. Instead, he didn't cave into himself. Rather, he dedicated himself to a worldview that would have left the vast majority of people speechless and puzzled. The title of the memoir that he wrote is I Must Say, and it is in this memoir that he describes a specific event that encapsulates his own personality. Before Nancy died, Martin was in the jacuzzi with his son Henry. The night before Nancy died. They were seated as they were in the tub together. There was a heaviness of grief in the air, as if it may swallow them both, a thickening with the loss to come. Martin, on the other hand, looked at his son and said, "This is the strangest night for you, because it's the worst night of your life, and yet you're being empowered." In the midst of his own personal grief, Martin's impulse was not to bemoan the situation, but to impart knowledge and counsel to his son. He taught his children that the sun will still rise, and the sorrow they were going through was testament to the enormous love they had been lucky enough to share with each other. He did this to teach them that the sun will keep coming up. The catastrophe, in his opinion, was not a setback, but a gift of insight into the very nature of existence itself. He always believed it was. He informed his kid that they had been empowered by the experience of loving someone so totally that losing that person felt like the end of the world. This was something he shared with his kid during their chat. With Nancy dead, the business was anticipating a comeback or a rebound. But Martin was loyal to a ghost till the very end. Martin did not think that the absence of his wife was the end of the talk. He said, "I'm still married." He said it quietly, lethally, His friends were known to tell him not to try to set him up, because he conceded that even if he wasn't a monk, Nancy was just a tough act to follow. He continued to talk to her in his brain, to try to connect with her spirit before making significant decisions. That was his reputation. What separates him from other people is the kind of dedication he shows, especially at an organization which prides itself on being the next big thing. And the tragedy of the 2000s was not over with Nancy and her death. The death of his wife seemed to unlock a floodgate of things to say farewell. In 2012, his good friend Nora Ephron, the bright mind behind the classic When Harry Met Sally, died abruptly after being diagnosed with an illness. Martin was chosen to speak first at Nora's memorial service, since she was the one who gave the mental support to the whole Short family. Each time he thought of the pain of telling his children that Aunt Nora had died, he felt the sorrow of losing their mother all over again, rerun in high definition. He was the person whom everyone counted on, even back then, albeit he was the person. The question that is being asked everywhere is if Martin Short's relentlessly cheerful face hides the misery that he is going through. Yet those who have tracked his career for decades know the opposite to be the case. They've been monitoring him all these years. The fact that he uses comedy is not an attempt to hide something. Rather, it is a praise. He is not going to allow himself to become a victim of the challenges he faces. Because he had such a strong foundation of love with Nancy, he's convinced that the tragedy didn't send him sideways. He chose to be empowered consciously. He decided to go on with the party, not because he was forgetting Nancy, but because he knew this was just the sort of thing she would have wanted before she faded away. Looking at his career through the prism of this amazing loyalty, it is abundantly clear that his eclectic variety of work was never about the recognition, but about paying for the family he was so worried about keeping together. But to understand the genesis of this amazing perseverance, one had to go even further back in time, to a house in Hamilton that was completely silent. Martin was already learning to bury his idols when he was young, while he was there. By the mid-90s, the Hollywood machine was already working overtime, figuring out how to fit a guy like Martin Short into its various slots. Martin Short was a movie actor. He was a chameleon in the era of the high-concept movie that wouldn't quite fit in. He was entirely different from the others, but when the world was seeing him as a 10-year-old youngster in the cult oddity that was Clifford, released in 1994, Martin was quietly navigating a circle of pain that the cameras never recorded. Clifford was a film that received an Academy Award for Best Picture. The act was a conscious violation of all biological and logical laws. Martin was part of the legendary SCTV troupe, a band of Canadian misfits prepared to change the face of television comedy. It was a long time coming for him to be known as the old statesman of the comedy profession. One of those people was John Candy. Candy was a guy whose heart was bigger than his talent. He attended the event as a participant. In 1994, when John died of a heart attack while filming in Mexico, that close-knit group was almost totally shattered. They were in Mexico when John died as well. The shockwaves came close to dropping the group to their knees. Martin is the one who has not fallen for the lure of making a public show of mourning, but has held his ground. He was the one who delivered, who saw that in a field founded on ego, the only thing that endures is how you treat your pals when the punchlines run out. He was the one who got this. It was not the business that drew his attention, but the people in it. "The best way to survive 50 years in show business," he once said, "is to show up and do a lot of different things, including commercials and Broadway, and not let the edge of stardom make you feel sick or dizzy." Gilda Radner, on the other hand, was the most important ghost in Martin's professional life. And perhaps she was the catalyst for the very first real test of his character. They knew each other from the staging of Godspell in 1972, and for a time, they were the it couple of the Toronto art world. In 1972, the musical Godspell was presented. Martin has been very direct, even painfully honest, throughout his whole narrative concerning the period of history in question. He confessed that he lacked the ability to understand Gilda's deep-seated problems, or her fight with eating disorders when he was younger. He also confessed that he didn't grasp these two things. At that time, he couldn't even start to understand these two things. But this is the time when the good man rises from the ruins of a mistake he made when he was younger. It created stress in their relationship, and that's why they broke up. But now is the time those mistakes have been made. Far from a disastrous departure from the Hollywood machine, the relationship of Martin and Gilda became one that would last the rest of their lives, reaching to the very depths of their beings. In a world where the term X is often a four-letter word, Gilda became Martin's most loyal supporter. It was Gilda who went to the Saturday Night Live headquarters and told the producers that they were making a mistake if they did not hire the man for whom she had once had love feelings. By this time, they were already separated. Martin was there when she got the news. She had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. This was the same cold-hearted criminal who would, sometime in the future, snatch Nancy. She died in 1989 at 42, and he didn't employ her death as a pretext to garner sympathy points on the talk show circuit. He carried the lesson of her delicate brilliance into his marriage to Nancy, and he promised that he would never again be too busy to understand the person who was standing immediately in front of him. He was very serious about his vow. This was the period of his life when he became a prime example of the phenomena described as wavering on the precipice of stardom. Films like Three Amigos did not become instant hits, and his style of flamboyant and immature antics sometimes left the business bewildered. Martin, however, did not want to be a movie star in the classic, self-consciously serious sense of the word. He added a sweetness to his characters that made Generation X and Millennials feel they were in on the joke. One example of this is the crazy wedding planner, Frank, who appeared in Father of the Bride. He refused to include even a single horrible narrative about any particular individual in his memoirs, because he really did not believe in ripping people to shreds for the sake of earning a few additional book sales. The reason he did this was that he did not want to miss the potential to make a few more sales. Word was getting around that this was the guy who would take a fight between him and his wife and make a comedy sketch out of it to relieve the tension. He was building a rep as the sweetheart of Tinseltown. His funny antics were helping him build his image in the profession. Everyone knows that he told the story of a dispute that happened between himself and Nancy in 1977. To make her laugh, he turned into his high-waisted alter ego, Ed Grimley, in the middle of the argument. In the beginning, he learned that if you can't make the person you love smile when you are fighting, then you have already lost. This was early in his realization of it. Martin Short, a humorist, was a man who had mastered the art of the good goodbye. He had buried his first love, his best friend, and his parent figures without letting resentment take root. Martin Short was a man who had mastered the art of the good goodbye. During the decade of the 90s, Martin Short was a guy who had mastered the art of the good goodbye. But the key to this almost superhuman tenacity was not discovered in the writers' rooms of Saturday Night Live or the sets of Three Amigos. Martin Short was a man who had mastered the art of the good goodbye. It all began long before, in a house in Hamilton, where a 12-year-old boy learnt that the sun rises whether or not you are ready for it. And this was the start of it all. He was born on March 26, 1950, in the city of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. His parents, Charles Patrick Short and Olive Grace, were delighted to welcome their son into the world. It was the birth of Martin Hayter Short. His mother was working as a concert mistress, while his father was working as an executive at a steel corporation. He was reared by his mother in his childhood. 5 children were born to the family, 3 of them older than the others, and 1 a sister. Short was the youngest of the 5 children. Martin had been talented as an actor, mimic, and entertainer from an early age. He started to show what he could do. His mother gave him all the motivation he needed to achieve his goals and follow his abilities. The rest of the world was caught up in the counterculture movement of the late 60s. But Martin was experiencing his own personal revolution of loss. The 3-part symphony of tragedy the hammer descended in would have been sufficient to calm the souls of the vast majority of mankind. It started in 1968. On Valentine's Day, a day usually filled with roses and good feelings, Olive, his mother, who had been the concertmaster who had instilled in him the rhythm of the great American songbook, died. She had been the primary influence on his musical development. Martin was born when she was only 17 years old. After that, only a bit over 2 years later, the terrible timing became almost operatic in its severity. In 1970, on the same evening that his brother Michael was getting married, their father, Charles, had a stroke that eventually proved fatal. Michael was having his wedding celebration at the moment. Say whiplash, for example. One parentless child, meanwhile, was 20-year-old Martin Short. In the course of 24 hours, a wedding suit and a shroud had been brought to his notice. Many a young man would have channeled his pain into a lifelong pursuit for revenge on the world. Martin, on the other hand, had a strange understanding, as if by magic. Eventually, he learned to see this heartbreaking trifecta not as a curse, but as a gift of sorts. Early on, he realized that you either empower yourself through your situation, or you become a victim of it. His decision was power. He told himself that the worst had happened, and now he was free to run after the light without any restrictions. He felt he was finally free to go towards the light. The first scar, which is believed to have opened the door to the arithmetic of joy idea, is said to have occurred even earlier in 1962. Martin was 12 and had just turned 12 and was a child of the winters in Hamilton and the games that were played in the neighborhood because he had just turned 12. David was the eldest son of the family, and he was 26 years old and the center of attention. He was magnificent and full of energy at the same time. Looking back on that morning, Martin is overwhelmed with an awful sense of premonition, and it was that morning that the news came from Montreal. Cause of death was motor vehicle accident. At that point, for the first time, the laughter in the Short home stopped abruptly. Moreover, it was only after David's death that the performer we still appreciate today came into his own. Instead of heading to the playground to air his sorrow, 12-year-old Martin went to his bedroom, closed the door, and started a theater. He created the Martin Short Show, an imaginary one-man variety hour where he was host, guest, and all of the audience. He did that to demonstrate his sadness. He would also dance in front of a group of spirits, video himself, and interview himself, in addition to interviewing himself. He therefore understood that if you keep a discourse that is running at a suitable pace, the shadows will not be able to take possession of you. Years later, he would share a moment with his friend Stephen Colbert that perfectly captured this secret society of the bereaved. Colbert had gone particularly far with some biting material at a White House correspondents' dinner, and Martin asked him, "Weren't you scared?" Colbert replied, "When I was 12, my father and 2 brothers were killed in a plane crash together. That day, I was scared." Martin looked at him and just thought, "I know what you speak." This is why the concept of the good man that we see in the world today is sustained. Martin Short's kindness is not the result of having an easy life, but rather knowing the extent to which a human heart may be broken before it breaks for good. Martin Short shows generosity since he knows this. This method is intended to preserve the Short family humor for quite some time after the dining room seats have been emptied. His sadness is shown in both his flamboyance and his childish play, which memorialize the family he has lost. He considered it and concluded that the most intelligent way to survive in this world is to keep cool in the face of tragedy. But because holding on to resentment is a waste of a life that was taken from other people before their time, you stay a sweetheart, you show up, you become involved in all sorts of things. Not only did he use comedy as a way of taking his mind off of the discomfort, but also to show his happiness about the fact that the sun continued to rise. Who is Martin Short, and what kind of guy is he? If someone wants to know what the true decision is, it is not important to glance at the shelves that hold the prizes. Take a mental note of the persons who are still present. Martin Short has built a fraternity that's so close to the Bible, it's almost biblical. This is not the case in the entertainment sector, where friends sometimes last only until an opening weekend of a movie. Take, for instance, the renowned colonoscopy parties he has thrown with Steve Martin, Tom Hanks, and producer Walter Parks, in that order. Doesn't that sound like a joke because of the way it sounds? A group of the most powerful people in Hollywood get together for a night of poker and bowel movements to cleanse their systems before going through with a medical operation. But it takes more than the jokes Martin is so fond of telling about the Jackson Pollock bathroom to find something that is not common: intimacy. Even though they have reached the maximum level of popularity, there are still guys who trust each other enough to be vulnerable, unstable, and human. Steve Martin has a famous quote that goes like this: "If Martin Short can't make a dinner that he's hosting, Martin will just cancel the whole thing." Here, it's about being the person who brings something to the table, not just funny. The most telling evidence, on the other hand, is to be found in the things that Martin does not do. We are now living in the period of the Scorched Earth book. This is a sort of book in which celebrities poke fun at their rivals to spend a few more weeks on the list of best-selling books. But when Martin sat down to write, I must say, he didn't include a single incident that turned out to be particularly bad. There is no trace of enmity in the background. And in the year 2026, as he walks through the strange wreckage of Catherine's death, we see the last and most painful evidence of what he is like. He's been on the front lines of the entertainment business for half a century and believes he's never worked with a bad person. Finally, a man who has spent his life keeping the party going has taken a seat in the audience. He's been in here for a long time. He chose not to perform, not because he didn't want to be defeated, but because he felt a tremendous commitment to his two children, Oliver and Henry, who were still alive. Even a legend knows when to sit in the shadows and pay homage to the loss, even if he has spent 75 years converting pain into delight. He has been turning sadness into happy his whole life. But this is the case. Is he a kind character? And he's above and beyond that. He's the kind of man who, at 12, 17, 20, and 60, walked into a cemetery and decided that the way to honor the dead was to be kind, completely kind, to the living. He's the type of guy who would make that decision. He's the kind of man that thinks about his wife and keeps talking to her in his head because he knows that a wonderful love does not end when the heart stops beating. He shows he is aware by thinking of his wife. Martin Short's story is a lesson that even if you're broken, you can be the one who helps to revitalize everyone else's spirits in the building. The life of Martin Short is the best example of resiliency, a reminder that there is no other comparable example. He was not trying to hide his anguish behind the mask of comedy. Rather, he was using it as a guiding light. That light is still glowing in 2026, even if it is a tiny bit less bright tonight. And it's still glowing.